Well. Hello there, folks. My name's Hypocrite, and this is TNO, or The New Order, The Last Days of Europe, or the mod that was in development for like 8 years or something, maybe 6. Well, I am pretty hyped. I was pretty hyped back in the day when I've get to know that this mod is being developed, and now we have the full version. Of course, the full version is not a version that contains all the stuff, but we get to play finally. And let's get right into it. Of course, I've played it for a moment. By moment I mean a day, as the Brotherhood, but I was stumped. I was stumped as hell by Samara, or the Russian Liberation Front, or something like that. So let's play as Andrei Vlasov and try to maybe reunite Russia. That would be cool. It's cool. So we get this cool starting window that will explain the whole lore behind the country that we get to play. The same thing is in Europa Universalis or in Equestrian War. So let's get into it. The Committee for the Liberation of the Peoples of Russia. In the bloodiest days of the West Russian War, when it seemed like the Reich's hold on Russia was on the verge of slipping forever, the German High Command turned to desperate means to stave off the collapse of their front line. Drawn from a range of auxiliary colonial militias of Russian conscripts that were meant to police German-held Russia, the Russian Liberation Army, or ROA, was created. In propaganda, the ROA was depicted as a proud Russian army fighting the Bolshevik menace of the West Russian Revolutionary Front. In desperation, the Germans even allowed the creation of the Committee for the Liberation of the Peoples of Russia, or KONR, as the embryo of a free Russian republic that would rule over areas liberated by the German country's offensives. By the German counteroffensives, not countries, fuck. Okay. Reality was much less flattering to the ROA. Its leader, Andrei Vlasov, a former Red Army general, was nothing more than a puppet of the Wehrmacht's high command. His officers were a disjointed bunch. Many were also captured Red Army officers, preferring to join the ROA than die in a German POW camp. Others were fascist emigres, I have no idea how this is pronounced, joining the ROA on a great crusade to defeat Bolshevism. The common soldiers were desperate cannon fodder, drafted at gunpoint by the Germans and sent to reinforce the most desperate sectors of the front. Far from being welcomed as liberators, Russian people caught in the conflict area welcomed the ROA soldiers with rock and insults. Despite all this, the ROA pushed on. The soldiers fought with the energy of desperation and managed to help turn the tide in the sector around Samara. Period. Soon, the ROA found itself beyond the German lines, freed from their former taskmasters. With the war winding down and the WRRF in retreat, the Germans wrote off their cannon fodder as mutinous Slav Untermensch. The new headquarters of the ROA in Samara were not spared any of the terror bombing campaigns that followed. Since then, the ROA has huddled in Samara, having traded one prison for another. Unable to expand their area of control by the terror bombings and forbidden to go back home in the West, the common soldiers of the army have languished for the better part of a decade in their garrisons. The ROA's officers, meanwhile, have grown weary of Vlasov's indecisiveness. They argue for a more decentralized leadership and for the abandonment of KONR's original democratic mission in favor of a continuation of the ROA's junta. Using General Sergei Bunyachenko as their mouthpiece, the men of the officers' committee scheme to take advantage of Vlasov's apathy and old age. However, the officers are not all united in ideology. Quite a few have formed a pro-democracy faction and argue that Vlasov's heir as chairman of the KONR should be Mileti Zykov, a former journalist that had maneuvered his way into being the chief propagandist of the ROA's regime in Samara. Zykov argues for the continued struggle to liberate Russia from Bolshevism as well as German oppression. In between all this, many common soldiers and lower-ranking officers have grown tired of the high command's bickering and seek to follow General Oktan's goal to use the ROA to build a strong fascist state and to enrich the soldiers in the process. The ROA is at a crossroad, loathed by all their neighbors as German collaborators, yet feared for their veteran army and iron discipline. The men of the ROA await the end of the terror bombing. Some seek to redeem their honor by rebuilding Russia. Others seek vengeance on the communists and on the Germans who have ruined their life. Finally, a growing minority simply want to lash out at the uncaring world that has forced them to lose a decade hold in Samara. So we have some features. Actually, the goals that we should head towards. Determine who shall win the power struggle to be the successor of Vlasov as leader of the ROA. Finish what the Germans could not and destroy the WRRF once and for all. Show the world the perils of underestimating the so-called traitorous dogs of the ROA. Onwards. So we are in a quite precarious location, as we actually border the Reichskommissariat Moskowian, but we have what others don't. We have planes. And boy oh boy, those planes will be indispensable in the reconquest of Russia. As I've said earlier, I've started with the Brotherhood, and even though I had motorized infantry and so on, I couldn't actually get into Samara. I couldn't kill off the committee because, well, the planes, as well as they have actually eaten up Gorky and Tatarstan, and they were finishing Vologda. So yeah, well, I know I am not a veteran in HOI4, but I'm not a veteran in HOI4, so I am not as experienced as some of you probably. But yeah, well, let's inspect the stuff. So we have one unit of mechanized infantry, we have 2 units of light infantry, and we have 2 units of regular infantry. As far as the events and decisions, we can of course go for the reunification of Russia, and we will form the Provisional Commissariat of Western Russia as Samara, when we eat, well, the West Russia, probably this part or something like that. The final boss will be the West Russian Revolutionary Front, of course. We can raid and loot. If you've played the demo, then you probably know what this is. We have the smuggling operations. We can smuggle in to Samara from the Reichskommissariat some guns. but it will influence our corruption and so on. We have the warlord development, which is the second thing that was in the demo, and we can purchase stuff from Zlatoust, and the leader of Zlatoust is Yevgeny Dragunov, so we all know where this is going. Let me take a sippity sip. I drink compote because it's good. So let's start with maybe with improved computing machine and with some guns. Support weapons too. I've realized that when you play as the Russian warlords, you actually have to push for weapons rather than industry or something like that, because we won't be building anything before the reunification into the West Russia. The focus trees are, well, seem a bit poor, but it's the case of those what were they called? Dynamic focus trees, right? So when we finish our focus tree, then we will get into another one, probably after the terror bombings end, because we have them, and they will really hinder our stuff. Actually, we won't be able to attack anyone before they end, so right now we are in the tutorial, so to speak. Okay, so let's let's start with the first focus tree, our guide. As another year rolls on, our guide Andrei Vlasov continues his Sisyphean reconquest effort. Whatever power he gathers, his underlings steal. Whatever legitimacy he possesses, the German bombing strip away. The sad man grows older, buried under the weight of history and the judgment of those outside his borders. Yet he has not yet given up. For the upcoming troubles in Germany may signal his one last chance. For now, his greatest quality is that he is able to maintain a coalition. The various generals like him better than they like one another, and the people have found his rule fair, if not particularly noteworthy. There are worse places in Russia than Samara, certainly, but if Vlasov is to serve as a guide to a renewed Russia, we must begin anew his consolidation of military and popular support. So let's start with it, and we'll see when it ends. Well, when the focus finishes. The Old Man. Vlasov's aides walked to and from the Old Man's office, the tidal nature of their back-and-forth movement echoing the Old Man's current situation. Even in these desperate times, few could stomach working directly for the traitor general himself. Those that managed to either ignore or disbelieve the accusations against Vlasov found themselves buried in drudgery, bored out of their wits instead of merely disgusted by the stench of treason. I hate this font, really. Better, perhaps, for an assignment on the border instead, where death and starvation dispelled the inactivity. Vlasov stood on political quicksand, his position shifting and changing, yet never improving. Some of his aides suspected that the old man would have preferred being hated by his generals instead of their current indifference. In the college of traders that filled the Airways upper echelon, Vlasov was not particularly liked, nor was he disliked. Whatever coalition or common ground he tried to build usually disintegrated within the month. If the old general could not be liked by everyone, he could at least try to gin up love and hatred within specific factions. Under him, Zykov's Democrats constantly agitated against Octan war profiteers. In between schemed the officers' committee, agitating General Bunyachenko as their puppets. Vlasov had long pondered which faction to cast his full weight behind. His remaining scraps of authority would tip the balance. Well, now that the time for a decision came, the general's aides could scarcely guess which side Vlasov would choose, nor how the ROA's future would play out. The traitor general is not yet done, so we gain some stability, and now we are able to... No, not yet. We will have to choose something around here, but let's go with our voice. Our consolidation effort goes through Mileti Zykov. Zykov is difficult to describe, for much of his past is cloaked in mystery. Few are sure where he comes from. The man claims to have been a leading ideologue in the opposition to the Soviet government, and he has indeed shown himself to be a highly talented public speaker and communicator. His effort of outreach to the people of Russia in general, and Samara in particular, have done much to generate what few shreds of good reputation that we possess. Zykov is among the greatest advocates of freedom and democracy in our officer corps, and he has built a small clique around this position. His aim is not merely to free Russia from warlordism and from the Germans, but to bring forth a new, carefully supervised democracy. To many militarists in our government, he is a soft man. To German loyalists, he is a decadent parasite, intent on betraying our German benefactors. Few are sure where Zykov is from, and few can claim to know his real endgame. But at this critical juncture, his propaganda skills are without peers. We need his voice as the army of liberation marches onward. Actually, we have some more events that actually happened before our focus is complete. A new factory for old guns, Armaments Factory number 14, was a small complex near the Samara rail yards. Repurposed by the ROA itself during the darkest days of the terror bombing, the small shack was soon built up. The factory, in reality little more than a large building with a few long wooden tables and a number of machine tools, was dedicated to taking apart German small arms and reverse engineering them for their own purposes. Vlasov and most of those under him knew well that their German support would eventually run out, and they had long made provisions to ensure that their myriad of German equipment, from Kar 89 KS to STG 44s, would remain operable when once it was no longer viable to receive the equipment from their former benefactors, either officially or through smugglers. The factory rarely worked during the day. The bombing made it hard to, but the workers toiled all night with small headlamps and minimal light, disassembling old or well-worn rifles and their respective ammunitions. These workers, despite their rugged condition, were not civilians, not officially at least. There were engineers, not just employees of the ROA, but members of it, experienced in their handling of German weapons for many years. Until recently, the factory had been minimally staffed. However, with the increasing amount of bloody victories won by the ROA, the soldiers at the front line needed more and more weapons, and those that we could get from German smugglers is becoming minuscule compared to those that we need. As such, Armaments Factory number 14, as of recently, expanded not only in terms of manpower, but location as well. A number of shoddily constructed buildings have been added to the original form a sort of complex where dedicated stations and senior engineers acted as efficiency creating machines. Lately, the factory was no longer just reverse engineering weapons, but producing their own versions of them, certainly not with the workmanship of the originals. However, they were cheap and easy to produce, and that's what the High Command wanted. The beast of industry rears its beautiful head. We have 100 units of Samara infantry equipment. So maybe I will not read those side events because they are really long and my eyes are actually unable to decipher this horrible font of HOI4. So if you don't mind, I will read only the events that are crucial to the plot, so to speak. And assassin strikes at Hitler. News from Germany is sporadic at best. Information smuggled out of Germany reports that shortly after celebrations over the moon landing settled, because there was a moon landing, military units and several platoons worth of bodyguard units filled the streets and immediately put the city under martial law. Apparently, an assassin which the Germans claim belonged to the Japanese Kempeitai attempted to kill the Führer, but was stopped in his attempt by one of Hitler's personal bodyguards. Yada yada yada, a house divided. Our voice. Welcome. Zykov had his bodyguard usher in Vlasov's aid. Usher? It's good to see you. We never hear enough from Commander Vlasov. The ever-energetic propaganda man of the ROA held a hazy position in the army's leadership. While not officially on the officers' committee, Mileti Zykov had wormed his way into a comfortable office in Samara's principal headquarters. Supporters of his faction could be seen streaming in and out at various times. A few stacks of pamphlets rested on the office's various surfaces. Zykov almost yanked the package from the aide's hands. The civilian began leafing through it, whistling all the while. Okay. Interesting, were the propagandist's only comments. For his trouble, Vlasov's aide was given a new package. Bring it to your boss, all right? Zykov said. Moments later, the aide found himself escorted back outside. The stream of visitors to the office had brought more officers to the corridor, waiting for a chance to talk to Zykov. None of them appeared too surprised to see one of Vlasov's aides coming out of the office. Zykov's energy knows no bounds. We have some political power. Plus, and I have to change the microphone's position because I won't be able to read any of the comments, any of the events, and they are painfully long. So let's go with our general. There is in theory a hierarchy to the National Liberation Army, with Vlasov at the top and a range of officers neatly arrayed below him. In practice, however, the opinion of the officer corps as a whole is critical to our endeavors. And the officer corps and its committee has a champion in Sergei Bunyachenko. A former Soviet officer, Bunyachenko was captured by the Germans in the Second World War and thrown into a penal colony for his troubles. Few in Russia mourned his fate, as he was widely blamed by the Soviet leadership for losing several critical battles in the opening stages of the war. In the dark days of the West Russian War, Bunyachenko was offered a way out of his jail sentence, joined the Russian Army of National Liberation and pushed the WRF back. Angry at the Soviet leadership and desperate to leave his jail, Bunyachenko agreed and quickly rose through the rank of the National Liberation Army. Bunyachenko is widely seen as a capable officer, beloved by the men for standing up to their ideas. The general cares for little but the reunification of Russia, the annihilation of the Soviet remnant, and most of all, the downfall of Germany. Okay, so Bormann will be the successor of Hitler. Whatever. Our general. It was unusual for Bunyachenko to request private delivery of messages. Usually the officer committee read and responded to all of Vlasov's communiques. Bunyachenko was not particularly involved in the day-to-day operations of the faction he nominally led. Hence, how surprising it was for him to bother reading Vlasov's communications. The general locked the door behind the aide before sitting back at his office. The room was austere, with no luxury other than a small furnace in the corner. The aide waited as the general read through a few of the sets of documents. One paper in particular gave the general pause. The aide recognized Vlasov's signature at the bottom. Bunyachenko read the letter a few times before looking up. "Who else knows the content of this bundle of documents, soldier?" "Only I and Vlasov, sir." "Good, you are dismissed." Bunyachenko crumpled the letter in a ball and threw it in his furnace before unlocking the door. Like that, the aide found himself back at the corridor. Special correspondence between Bunyachenko and Vlasov? It seems like it. Oh, and before I forget, the stability and war support can go into the negatives, and it's not unusual. So let's go for the last one, their puppet. Mikhail Oktan is a hard man to his supporters, a broken man to others. He has little sympathy for the communist regime, defeated twice in 15 years by the Germans. Nor he is a monarchist or democrat, for the weakness of these past regimes has brought Russia into the shackles of the failed communist regime. The Germans have become the masters of Europe, and what of it? For Oktan and his supporters, Berlin has crushed every Jewish regime that has obscured man's progress. Vlasov and his ilk might see the Germans as mean to an end, but Oktan knows better. He sees Vlasov as a broken, pathetic man squirming to get out from under the Germans. Mikhail Oktan is happy to collaborate with Germany. He sees no greater purpose than helping to enforce the German will upon the ruins of the Soviet Union, and his eager collaboration has let him secure many contacts in RK Moscovian and beyond. Mikhail Oktan may be a hard man or a broken man, but he is certainly a dangerous man, and an essential one, for through him Samara secures essential supplies from the German ogre. The Universal Spider. Vlasov's aide was guided into Oktan's office by two stern bodyguards. Their boss sat behind an office, smoking and reading. Ever genial, these officers stood to shake Vlasov's envoy. "Can I invite you to partake in some tobacco, fresh from our western neighbor?" The aide glanced at the box The aide glanced at the box of expertly rolled cigarettes. It had been so long since he tasted good tobacco. The thought of owing something to Oktan, even subconsciously, gave the aide some pause, but good tobacco was good tobacco. "Thank you, Commander." The aide placed on Oktan's desk the package he had been tasked to bring and helped himself to a few cigarettes. Oktan smiled. "I've heard good things about you, soldier. If you ever seek a new employer, please come visit me. I have no greater concern than my men's quality of life." A tempting offer for sure. The aide nodded again to Oktan and followed the guards back outside. One of them offered him a light. The aide walked back to Vlasov's offices, savoring the rare pleasure of good tobacco. It had been years. Perhaps owing Oktan is not so bad after all. 1,000 manpower, that's sick. So, I don't know from where, but I have this weird feeling that Oktan was or were in some other game, or maybe in in some HOI4 mod, but not as an Octan, as the Octan of course, but as someone else, but having the same amount of power. That sounds weird, but yeah, you know what I mean. Okay, so we have this it never ends focus. At unpredictable intervals, the planes fly over us. Sometimes their destination is further in the Russian interior. At others, however, the planes loop over Samara to drop their payloads. Its frequency left unpredictable. No one can get used to the random terror bombings. They can merely be endured. Yet the winds of change might still be blowing. Were Germany to fail into trouble of its own, perhaps these might be the last months of the terror bombings. As such, an officer conference has been gathered to discuss how best to prepare for the upcoming window of opportunity. Various factions make their case to Vlasov and other officers. In the meantime, regular salvaging efforts continue. Building broken down by the war machine see their content moved to new places. Supply convoys used as target practice are pushed out of the roads so others may pass. Life in Russia goes on. The pantry. The planes had come during the early morning supply run. Local peasants carrying bags of flour into the pantry disappeared in a cloud of smoke and debris. By the time the soldiers had dug them out, two had already died, crushed by the falling debris. The final survivor's left leg had been reduced to pulp by the building's collapse. Outside, his relatives wailed as men of the HOI dragged out the unconscious body. The poor bastard was placed on a cart. His family given a few bags of food to help cushion the loss of a working-age man. The garrison's captain reviewed his troops as they continued digging out the pantry and salvaging as much of the food as possible. One recruit, a young lad from the nearby village, looked particularly grim as he shoveled bits of concrete out into the yard. "Why the long face, soldier? It's not the first time the Germans bomb us, yes?" The young man paused and saluted the officer stiffly. "Sir, speak." "It's just, sir, the men of the village, they said that the HOI had the deal with the Germans, sir. That their bases were not bombed." The officer laughed. "Is that what they say in whatever shithole we dragged you out of? That the Germans have an ounce of mercy? That they give a shit about their own... that they give a shit about their old conscript army? Yes, sir. Well, there's your answer." The officer gestured toward the collapsed building where the other soldiers were pretending to work. "There's the answer for all of you. The HOI's got nothing but what we can get ourselves. Now get back to work. At this pace your dinner will mold under this pile of concrete." "Sir, yes, sir." And we have hits on everything. Okay, so now I have to choose. What should I go with? Take what is there, take what is ours, or take what is theirs? The first one will increase the civilian morale by a small amount. This will increase military morale by a small amount. And this will increase corruption. Okay, so this is probably the Octan's path. Yeah. This is Octan's path. This is Bunyachenko's path. And this is Zykov's path. So basically, it all boils down to what we can get later. So by going with the Bunyachenko's path, we will be able to get a lot of support equipment and a lot of pepeshas, and then some motorized. By going with Zykov, we'll have some motorized and support, and then 1,000 units of Sturmgewehr 45. And by going with Octan, we will get a lot of... I have no idea what is this NFLAGG1. And then some support and motorized. And of course the change in popularity of the thing. But my first thought was to go with Zykov, because, well, why not? Let's create a somewhat less cursed Russia than it actually is. So let's take what is there. At the conference, Zykov and his supporters have fiercely defended their position on both ideological and coldly pragmatic grounds. Their argument goes like this: increasing taxes on the population will drive it further away from us, and the Army of National Liberation can scarcely afford to lose what few bits of goodwill it still has. Accepting more German weapons is also not a good plan, as our soldiers must become known as liberators of Russia instead of mere German puppets. Thus, the best and hardest path, according to Zykov, is to make do with what we have. This will leave us weaker in the short term, but being loved by our people and accepted by those we liberate will be incalculably helpful. I have no idea what the civilian and the military morale actually is about. I mean, it's both low. So we'll see actually how it changes, because we can expand the smuggling stuff. We can increase the as it is written here. We can increase the variety of goods we can smuggle in, but it also increases corruption, and I have no idea if the corruption will fade. Will fade, or if it will stay at the same level. So I don't want to take chances. So let's go with Zykov. And I nearly forgot that we have some loot to spend. And I think that we should go with... let's see, what do we have here? We have some basic mechanization. Maybe, well, going for the literacy is not a bad idea. So let's build some new schools. And let's wait for the event. Oh, whoa. So we have an ultimatum on our hands. We have received an ultimatum from Gorky. They are demanding that we hand over a tribute of loot, or else they will raid us and take it from us anyways. We are at an impasse to decide. Do we decide to engage in confrontation with Gorky, possibly risking our men dying at the hands of our enemies? Or do we instead stand down and cave in to their demands, giving them the desired loot, allowing our men to live to fight another day? Okay, so what we have here is tank division. Probably there's some more, but I have no means to... well. No. Actually, no, we don't have anything to see what do they have. No, we have no idea how many divisions they have on their hands. Well, maybe let's try and fight with them. We have 5 divisions, so maybe this border conflict will not be as difficult as I think. Hey ho, let's go. Ah, well, shit. Oh, so they have actually 4 tank divisions. That's good to know. That's really good to know. Our reports have come back from the frontiers, and it's terrible news. Bandits have ambushed our garrisons and massacred our men, leaving them as grotesque and gnarled corpses scattered across the plains. Moreover, we have been informed that they have infiltrated border towns and villages, plundering and looting all they could from the defenseless population. With our units unprepared, there is little that we can do as they scurry back to where they came from, having left a path of utter misery and rampage behind them. So, let's hope for the best. And maybe there will be something else to see. There is a garrison slaughtered. We awake today to news of death and defeat. Our barracks have been ravaged by bandit pillagers, and our garrison forces lay dead on the dirt and in a particularly gruesome and horrific manner, with blood and brains splattered across walls and a glowing smoke leaving the soldiers' quarters. Our manpower has been seriously diminished by raiding forces in acts of sheer wickedness and brutality. Now they are nowhere to be seen, the winds of the frontiers whistle and beckon, and the people of Samara cower with fear. Whatever action is to be taken against these barbarian armies, it must be swift and it must be soon. So we lose something. Or maybe not something, but actually a lot. There is a 350 manpower to be lost. So yeah, I should have stepped back. The plight of the common man. The young officer's speech had been short and crisp. Zykov's usual point man on tough debates within the ROA's officer corps, Major Sergei Ivanovich, spoke to the assembled grandees of the ROA for his absent master. Amidst the monotone droning so common to the ROA's conference, Ivanovich's style was refreshing in its earnest simplicity. Yes, the young man agreed it would be unfair for the ROA's commanders and soldiers to weather even more deprivation. It would be easier to take from the peasants or to crawl to the Germans for supplies. The men of the Army of National Liberation, however, should and could be better than that. Each increase of taxes bled away the army's dwindling popular support. This situation could not go forward. As to German weapons, what of them? Military surplus that had been used to massacre the motherland's children, given by the 20th century's greatest criminals. The ROA could do better. The words of the Zykovite faction had been idealistic, yes, naive perhaps, but they stood out from the hopeless pragmatism of Bunyachenko's faction and from Oktan's weary cynicism. The officers voted for Ivanovich's proposed austerity under the watchful eye of enlisted men. Our current supplies will have to do. We have a change in popularity of authoritarian democracy. So, actually we have nothing else to do rather than going down this scavenging path, but actually it's actually been an hour of raw recording, so maybe I'll stop here. Sorry there was little to no action here, but no, aside of the Gorky border war, there was only me droning or reading some stuff. Actually, there was a lot of more events that were to be read, but I've decided that they actually bring nothing to the table aside of some sort of flavor, some sort of like in-depth look at Samara's shit. I've almost dropped my glass. Aside of Samara's internal problems. But yeah, this will be the end of the episode. I hope that you've liked it, and feel free to like, to comment, and to subscribe to the channel. And I will see you in the next episode. See ya!